Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Arsaholics podcast on a Wednesday evening, which feels like a Friday because it's the Jubilee weekend in England. So everyone's got a long weekend. We don't usually get long weekends which start on a Thursday for anyone outside the UK. So this is very weird. I know that some places in Europe and Asia have bank holidays on a Thursday, but this is a completely random thing for us. So it's kind of taken me by surprise. I think it's taken quite a lot of people by surprise as well. Aaron, how do you feel going into this 4-day Jubilee weekend?
Yeah, I'm also very confused.
It's well confusing.
Yeah, I don't know what to do. I feel like, should I go on holiday somewhere, but all the airports are buggered, so we can't. We're stuck on this island. And yeah, even at work today, it was just weird. It felt like Christmas Eve, when like you're about to go on a long holiday and you're about to embark on this period where no one really knows what day of the week it is anymore. I definitely got weird Christmas Eve vibes.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Because it's also a bit strange because there was Memorial Day in the US on Monday as well, right? So I don't know if anyone works in any sort of international businesses, but yeah, so all the US crowd are off on Monday, the UK crowd are off on Thursday and Friday. It's basically a write-off week. So
yeah, I think a lot of Europe have Monday off as well, next Monday. So it's just like an international time of not doing any work.
Get ready for the summer and just don't do any work. And we're also we're trying something new today. So we're trying some new software. So this is new for Aaron and myself. This is quite exciting for us, seeing ourselves in a different way than we would normally on Zoom. We're using a product called Riverside. It's the first step. So if you're listening to this, congratulations. It's the first ever Arsaholics recording on Riverside. So, I mean, we're making history.
Let's hope it doesn't crash. We get through it first.
Yeah, so there's every chance that we record a full episode and it doesn't record properly and this never gets released and this is a complete waste of time, and don't even know why I'm saying this because no one will ever hear it in that case. But anyway, we'll hope for the best. We'll hope for the best. It looks good so far, at least on the face of it. But, we're a few weeks now since the end of the season. Dust has sort of settled. People are now, the international break is starting. Well, it started. England have named their squad. Scotland have just played Ukraine in the World Cup qualifier. Ukraine have just knocked Scotland out. So it's all kind of happening. Like the Premier League season's done, the Champions League final is done, and we're now all sort of looking forward. I feel like it's not the time that people want to open up wounds and bad feeling from how last season ended. But at the same time, it's also a time to reflect in a maybe forward-looking way. And that's what we're going to try and do a bit today. So it might be a case that over a few episodes we jump into talking about the squad in sort of a holistic way and covering all the positions. But today we thought that we would talk about strikers. And we would just reflect on how our strikers have done this season and what we think we need to do with them and where we need to go this summer into next season. And we didn't really plan this because we weren't really sure if this Riverside experiment was going to work, but we just thought, screw it. So apologies if it doesn't sound like the most planned episode, but hey, look, maybe you're in for a ride. Aaron, are you looking forward to talking about strikers?
I am, because this has been a bugbear for me for a long time, which was, and we've talked about this on the pod before, which is how we've handled our striker situation in January. And I think we both kind of agreed that the conclusion was we essentially didn't go for any sort of striker in January because we thought doing so would damage the long-term plan of what we could do this summer and the type of striker that we could get now versus the type of striker that we could get in January. Now, whether or not that was the right decision will kind of depend on what happens this summer with who we get in. So the club have kind of put a lot of pressure on themselves to get this right this summer with one striker, two strikers, three strikers, I don't know. But it's clear that our play last season was massively lacking and we suffered big time because we didn't have a goal scorer and we didn't have... there were times where the strikers that we had just didn't deliver throughout the course of the season. And we're talking Aubameyang, Lacazette, and then to a certain extent, Nketiah. So I'm excited because strikers are exciting when they come in. They get goals, hopefully.
And we've had like a back to front revolution under Arteta, hasn't it? It's kind of been start from getting defenders in and then slightly move to more progressive areas. And this is the summer where striker will be addressed allegedly, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Arteta hasn't really signed that many attacking players since he's joined. I know he signed Ødegaard, but apart from that, it's been we're still a little bit in the dark over what kind of attacker Arteta actually really wants from the transfer market, and I'm sure we'll cover this shortly. But and we probably need a couple, be that up front or across the front three. We need some additions to reinforce some of the great young talent that we have, and some of the talent that will probably be leaving in the summer as well. So, yeah, I'm super excited because it's a chance to really define where we go under this regime and under this project. And, it's so important that we get it right.
A couple of things I just wanted to pull you up on what you said. So we've talked various times during, particularly towards the back end of the season when things weren't going so well. We talked about this strategy in January, which was kind of all or nothing almost in some ways, and saying kind of, look, we're not gonna go for any short-term fixes, any kind of second, third choice in the transfer market strikers. We want to go for our number one choices, and we're going to die on that sword. And if we don't finish in the top four, it's okay. We've covered that in plenty of times. The one that was, the public pursuit that was covered in the media was Vlahovic, and that just backed up everyone's theory about this, right? That clearly, we've gone in for Vlahovic. He's a big price tag. So clearly he's someone that the club are willing to spend money on a striker. That was what that showed evidence of. And then there was aside from Vlahovic, there was no one else linked. There was no other stories that came out. So it led all of us to this conclusion, right? That, it's all or nothing. We either want the very best or it's nothing, and we will wait for the very best. How much, though, mate, do you think that that's just a case that was all that came out in the media, and maybe there are other things? And I say that because I don't know if you saw this, but today there was an interview. There was extracts from an interview from a striker called Noah Lang, who I personally had never actually heard of. But apparently he's Dutch. He plays for Club Brugge. He's 22 years old. He's meant to be a decent player. And there were quotes from him basically saying that Arsenal came in for him on deadline day in January. And eventually it didn't work out because Club Brugge didn't want to sell or whatever. Mm-hmm. So let's just say if that is true, that sort of puts in the bin some of the theories that we had, which was it was all or bust, and that gives some kind of evidence, surely, or some kind of suggestion that there was a little bit of indecision or scrap or willingness to go out and maybe get a second, third choice kind of centre forward, if you know what I mean.
I mean, we'll never really know either way, right?
Yeah.
But I think at the very least, I'm almost certain that the club would have considered another option, right? It's not like they had, okay, we're going to go for Vlahovic, and if it doesn't work, we're literally not going to sign anyone. They probably have a bunch of names, and they work through them to say, okay, who's available? What kind of wages would he come in on? Will the club sell? What kind of range? And then as it progresses, they will kind of finalize and say, well, actually, are we really interested at this rate? So I think it's a case of either they didn't want, they only wanted the best and they couldn't get the best then. And maybe they thought actually the kind of second or third tier names that we might need to come in as a number 2 or number 3 striker just weren't worth the money at the time. It's interesting because there was an interview with Matt Turner, the new number 2 goalkeeper that we've signed. And he described his story about how he was linked with Arsenal. And initially he said his agent came to him and said, look, there's an outside chance that Arsenal might be interested in you. You're one of I think he said 8 or 9 names that they're considering. And they just thought, okay, it's very, very unlikely. And then over time that got firmed up. So I assume we're probably doing that with every position. We have a list of names, a list of players that we are considering, and we're putting the feelers out, seeing who will come, who won't come, who's possibly interested, what are the wages, who'd be willing to sell. And, we are at this point now finalising those names and trying to get those deals over the line. And it sounds like Gabriel Jesus is one of those names. I'm sure there are a bunch of others. We've seen Calvert-Lewin linked. We've seen... who else have we been linked with? I don't know actually. But,
yeah, Tammy Abraham, Semi
in the
Hen,
past,
Victor
yeah.
Semi Hen, all those sort of guys. Those are the people who allegedly we're looking at in this window. Before we talk about the type of striker that we want to sign, should we reflect a little bit on the people who are still at the club? And let's take Aubameyang out of this equation. He left in January. It's on a loan, I believe, right? But ultimately, there's an understanding that the contract expires now. Something like this. But at the end of the day, he's basically not a player anymore, right?
Yeah.
So let's not even bother. But what we have in the squad right now are two centre forwards whose contracts are expiring, and a young centre forward who's been on loan at Middlesbrough. So we've got Alex Lacazette, we've got Eddie Nketiah, and we've got Folarin Balogun, who was at Middlesbrough, and now the loan's finished. Fine, there are other more junior strikers, but maybe we just talk about those guys because those are the only only other strikers who played minutes for us at any point last season. Let's also perhaps, well, I'm not saying necessarily exclude, but we treat Martinelli, I think, as a wide player at the moment. He's not someone who. Yeah. So let's talk about that, Aaron. So Lacazette and Eddie's their contracts are allegedly up. Well, allegedly up. Their contracts are up this summer. There was talk about Eddie being offered a new deal, and seemingly he actually might sign this deal. Before we go to Eddie, let's go with the senior striker, Alex Lacazette, who it seems like at this point there is no rumour, there's no stories going around that he's going to sign a new deal. It looks like he's done and he's off and he's going to go on a free somewhere. How do you feel about that? Do you feel okay with Lacazette leaving, or would you rather he stayed at the club?
No, I think it's unquestionable where you say, should he stay? I don't think he should stay. I think the bigger mistake that we made was not letting him go last season, if I'm being honest. I know there was talk and there were rumours where he was linked with Atletico last season, I believe, and I think if we had managed to get him out last summer, it might have meant the striker situation would have played very differently that summer, or even in January, because obviously he's on high wages. But no. So,
but just to clarify, are you saying that you think if we had sold him in the summer, let's just say even if you got, I don't know, let's just call it for argument's sake, 15 to 20 million pounds. For argument's sake, let's call it that much, yeah? Do you think that you would have seen that? Do you think that we would have gone for a good striker last summer?
Not necessarily, but I think our striker department would have been far more equipped to deal with the Aubameyang departure when it happened. I think. So
you think that we would have signed someone? Are you saying?
I think we probably would have signed someone.
Oh, right, okay.
In last summer, if not, we would have almost certainly had to have been forced to sign someone in January, because I think the way we kind of let it play out is that we've got Aubameyang and Lacazette, and at the time, most of us would have said that's probably enough. Like they're two decent enough strikers. Yeah, you are relying on them to come good, but you kind of hope that they deliver. And what actually happened was Aubameyang couldn't deliver for a variety of reasons. Then we thought, okay, well, we've got Lacazette and, if needed, Eddie and Nketiah. Let's see if they will deliver. And ultimately, Lacazette just didn't deliver in terms of goals. And yeah, he contributed in other parts of the pitch for periods, and that's cool. But ultimately, this guy has come in £50 million. And I think when you look at it, if you're being, kind of brutally honest, I think he's been a massive disappointment.
Yeah, so say if we split that up a little bit, because I agree that if you look at Lacazette through the time that he's been at Arsenal, the fact that he was signed for 50 million as our number 9, effectively someone who we thought that we had Olivier Giroud, and for all of Giroud's qualities, he wasn't someone who was scoring 20 plus goals a season. So Lacazette was signed to be that guy. Let's make no two ways about it. That was the purpose of his signing, to score goals, to be, to challenge for the golden boot and all that kind of stuff. And then we got Aubameyang in after that, which in theory was great, as well. But Lacazette, pre-Aubameyang, post-Aubameyang, never ever scored 20 league goals in a season for Arsenal, which for me is not what if you pay £50 million for a centre forward, that's what you want. You want that. That's what you aim for, and he's never done that. So I completely agree with that element of it. do you need to chop that up a little bit and sort of say, okay, look, that's one thing. Whether he was worth that money and whether he's overall sort of disappointed in the goal scoring kind of department is one thing. The season that's just gone, let's just say even if we had sold him, Aubameyang probably would have maintained his position as first choice striker at the beginning of the season, through being club captain and all that kind of stuff. And then when it became sort of clear that it wasn't really happening for him, and then when ultimately the big thing happened, the big disciplinary issue happened, and we brought Lacazette in, Arteta, maybe because of Lacazette's qualities, maybe not, he played Lacazette in a role where ultimately we did start scoring lots more goals, right? So is it fair to be that harsh on Lacazette this season when arguably when he started games, when Oba sort of left, he was playing in this role which was intended to bring other players into the game and actually did increase our goal output. Lots of wide players were scoring goals. Goals weren't a problem for a while, when he started. So are we being? Is it too harsh to judge him that harshly this season?
I think if he had maintained that role from then until the end of the season, I would have said, fine, we found a system to accommodate Lacazette that also gets the best out of everyone else. But ultimately, he wasn't able to maintain that role either. And that could be because other teams found us out and figured out how to stop him. But we very quickly had to shift away from that and bring Eddie into the team because just Lacazette wasn't providing that output. And I think it was a case of not Arteta wanting to play that way. I think he was like, how am I going to get the best out of this bunch of players when I've got Lacazette who can't score goals, and I've got, for whatever reason, he didn't trust Eddie Nketiah at the time. And I think he thought, well, if I bring him deep, I can try and put the emphasis on some of the younger players, the wide players, scoring these goals instead. And he changed to a system. I don't think that's a preferred way of playing. I could be wrong. Maybe he will sign a striker that does that in the future. But I think that was more a case of like, okay, I've got a striker that doesn't score goals. What can I do to try and score goals in? And he thought, let's try the system where we drop this player deep and see if he can provide more value there, because he's not providing any value in the box. And that sort of worked for a while, and he did work very hard, and he had a few games where, there were times where he was man of the match, but ultimately he couldn't even maintain that, and that's what's disappointing. If he'd been able to do that from now until the end of the season, that was what got us, the goals, then fine. I'd even say then there's probably an argument that you keep him on, but he couldn't do it in the box, and he couldn't consistently do it when he wasn't in the box either, and that's just ultimately not good enough, I don't think.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think it's certainly. I think for me, the big problem I had with Lacazette is effectively what you were saying towards the end, is that when we needed something different, because when it's working, when he was playing that role and it was working and other players were scoring, that was fine. But ultimately, they were young players, and we were, we couldn't rely on them to be consistent. There are times in matches and games where that's just not working, and then you sort of need senior players to sort of say, okay, I've got to pull something out of the bag here. I've got to use my experience. I've got to do something a little bit. It might even be outside of the game plan slightly, but just dig deep, lead, show that even if things aren't going our way, that we can turn it around. And that never happened, right? There were some games, Wolves at home, where he scored at the end, and I'm not saying he didn't contribute in any way, but I think when things start going south towards the back end of the season, you needed leadership, and you needed a striker to kind of just to give a little bit more and do something a bit special. And he just couldn't do anything. He couldn't do anything at all. And so for me, I agree with what you said at the beginning. There'll always be a place in my heart for Laka. There's something about him which was quite cult. He's a little bit cultish. He's a little bit. He's got a lot of sauce. He's got a lot of style. He scored some of his goals have been good goals against good teams. He put good performances often against very good sides and scored good goals against good sides. But he's one of those guys. Unfortunately, I think he's the scorer of good goals rather than a good goal scorer. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's just one player where he's just never really found his place in this team. We weren't sure. Yeah, we signed him as the first striker, and he couldn't really make it work then. And then we signed Aubameyang. We weren't sure, is he like the second choice striker, or is he a second striker in a 2? Is he a number 10? We've sort of tried everything with him, and he's never really been able to make it work consistently anywhere. And, you know, hindsight is a wonderful thing, and it's easy to say this now, but I think looking back, he is probably someone we should have cashed in on and been a bit braver with in terms of selling him. Because, you know, let me ask you this. Was there ever a point in the last 2-3 years where you were convinced that Alex Lacazette was our number one striker and going to be our number one striker for years?
No, there was never that. I think particularly because when Aubameyang came in, and Aubameyang was such a prolific goal scorer.
Yeah.
You know, it was never a case where, you know, it was always a case where I thought if Aubameyang gets injured, we're going to really struggle. I never thought that Lacazette could be that guy, no. But it was okay when Aubameyang was firing and you had Lacazette. It was actually okay, but it's not when you've got to be the main guy, particularly when you're sort of at his age now, where there are some players that you think clearly now, you know, people like Ronaldo and Ibrahimovic, and there are other players that are coming into my head right now who past their 30s, they're still doing it. They're still delivering. They're still keeping up that level. I don't see Lacazette being able to do that. I think he could go to a slower league and be better. I think Lacazette could probably go to Italy and do a job. Don't get me wrong. Exactly. Like, you know, go back to France, go to Lyon, do well. Not in the Premier League. You could go in the Premier League and go to a mid-table side and get you 10 goals a season. You could do that. But that's about it, isn't it? Really, I think
that's my gut feel. I think he could easily go to, like you said, France and probably get 15, maybe 20 goals if he finds a system and a manager that is willing to just really build everything around his deficiencies. But ultimately, for a team like us, we need him to make up for other people's deficiencies, you know? But right now, it just feels like we're accommodating him and trying to make it work, and we just never could.
Agree. So we're agreeing to Lacazette. I think there's almost nothing more to say about that. It doesn't look like there's no rumours that he's going to get a new contract. We're okay with the fact that he's not going to get a new contract. He'll go on a free. Good luck to him. If he ever turns up at the Emirates for another team, he will get a very good welcome.
Absolutely.
You know,
of course.
Exactly. Never been an arsehole. Never bitched and moaned when he wasn't in the team. Never did. I think that's a big deal. Never heard rubbish out of his mouth. You know, always have a good word to say. But I think, you know, it's probably time for everyone to amicably shake hands and go. So, and you know, another player that we probably thought we were going to say similar things about a few months ago. And I'm thinking particularly around games when we were away at Everton and games when this guy was coming off the bench and not doing anything. And we were like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? Is his head already, you know, at a different club and all that kind of stuff? Eddie Nketiah, he sort of came back in the team as he came into the team after Lacazette stopped really offering anything. Eddie started games. His first start was against Southampton, I believe. And then, and he didn't score. Although we had a shed load of chances that game, he didn't score, but there was evidence to suggest that actually he was adding a little bit more than Lacazette was. And then all of a sudden, he starts scoring goals, and he basically, I think, gets 7 goals in 10 games at some point, you know, over a stretch of games. And he is adding a lot, you know, visually, and maybe that's just contrast to what we had seen from Lacazette, but he's not just adding a lot versus what Lacazette was giving us, he's adding a lot versus what we had seen of him off the bench. So the latest rumour is, Aaron, is that we have offered him $100,000 a week for 5 years. He's 22 years. I think he's just turned 23 now, like this week. But we've offered him, you know, a 5-year deal, $100,000 a week. Allegedly, he's going to accept. What do you think? How do you feel about that? So
honestly, I don't think I've ever flip-flopped on a player as much as I have done with Eddie. So, you know, I think I give him the benefit of the doubt because he's an academy player and he's come through the system. And ultimately, a 23-year-old striker in the Premier League is quite there aren't many of them. And there aren't many of them that are scoring more goals than he is. Because it's very, very hard to come in at that young an age, well, even though 23 isn't that young nowadays, but to come in and play as a striker and get 15, 20 goals. That just doesn't happen, right? So there's that. I think that part of me though is like, well, what did he want? Did he want to stay? And was it just about the money? And is that why now he's now considering staying? Or was it about the fact that he just wasn't playing and now he can see a path to playing? Because I think if ultimately though, my view on this is that giving him a contract, we don't lose that much by giving him a new contract. Because the other alternative is he goes on a free. If he goes on a free, we get nothing.
A tribunal.
So we get a little bit, maybe a little bit, maybe we don't know how much it's going to be, but I assume the club know roughly how much it's going to be, and we've calculated that and thought actually, if we give him a new contract, there's essentially 3 outcomes here, right? One is that he continues to do a reasonable job, gets goals for us in this team over the next 4 or 5 years. It's been quoted, and he becomes a success. If that's the case, then it's a fantastic decision to give him a new contract. Option 2 is that he doesn't, and he continues to kind of just blow hot and cold, and actually the last 3 or 4 games, or the last kind of like 2 months of the season was just almost like a Joe Willock at Newcastle type situation where he kind of just got goals, but actually couldn't really deliver that consistently over the next 5 years. And actually we struggle to we have to replace him ultimately. But I think in that case, we can just sell him, and actually his sale value will probably be quite high because he's still English, he's still young, and I still think at worst we probably still get 10 million, 15 million for him.
Yeah.
Because he could still do a job in the bottom half of the Premier League. He could still go abroad and do a decent job. So, and the third outcome is that we can't sell him because he's on too high a wages and he doesn't work out. But I find that option very unlikely. So ultimately, there are, out of the 3 options, the 2 options we do okay. We either get a decent fee for him or he does well for Arsenal. And I think the other option is we don't give him a contract and he goes away on a free. We get a little bit of money from a tribunal, but that isn't a good outcome for us really, because we probably don't get that much money for him. He probably either goes somewhere else and signs a contract and maybe he does well, maybe he doesn't. But there is a lot more upside to us keeping him than not keeping him, I think. Yeah,
the maths work, don't they? So I think if you want 100 grand a week for 5 years, I think it's about 25 million or something like that. It's like 26 million.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the financial outlay of losing him, let's just say you lose him on a free, for argument's sake, it's free, to replace him. Yeah. Say with even a good striker. How much is just a good second striker? It's still going to cost about 20 million, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like a good second striker. Yeah. And wages, that's it. 20 million plus wages. So mathematically, it completely works. And I think that, I've not heard any compelling argument which suggests that it wouldn't. I think the only argument that says that it wouldn't is that if it does go to a tribunal, there's actually quite a good chance that Eddie Nketiah could be the record fee paid at a tribunal, because if you look at all the things they've taken into account in historically in tribunals, it is things such as how long they spent in the academy, how they performed at the academy, how many games they played in the first team, how many goals they scored in the first team, England kind of youth record, and also is this player a player who is important for the team that they are leaving? So on that evidence, he's been starting for us and all that kind of stuff.
But isn't the tribunal only paid if he goes to another English club?
Yes.
So there is a risk that he could go to Germany or something.
Yeah, that's
true. And we
true.
get, I think, like a FIFA amount, which is a lot less, right?
I completely agree with you. Completely agree. So if he went to an English club, I guess the point is there's every chance. I think Danny Ings went on a tribunal for, was it 12, 13 million?
Or something like that, yeah.
And that was a little while ago. So there's every chance that we get 15 million. Let's just call it 15, whatever. If that happens, if you get 15 million for him at a tribunal, then what you could probably argue is, okay, fine. So then replacing him and getting another player as a backup striker, you could probably make it net even. But is it worth the risk? So then you're bringing in a good striker, not a great striker, a good striker to be a backup striker who doesn't know your team. You don't know if he's going to settle. You don't know, he's going to take time to get used to the system. So it's a risk, but whereas now you have got a striker who is 23, he's young, he knows the club, he gets the manager, he understands what the manager's trying to do, he understands the player around him. For all those reasons, it feels like it now makes sense. It perhaps wouldn't make sense to me if he carried on the way that, if things were going the way that they were going before he started games, towards the back end of the season, where it looked like when he was coming on, he was disinterested. He wasn't very clinical. He wasn't adding anything. It just looked like Arteta didn't like him, and he wasn't really up for it. And then I get it. Then it's kind of just like, you know what, it's not going to add any value. But for me, to sign a contract in this manner, it makes sense. The other thing is, right, again, offering him this contract also makes sense for the tribunal reason, right? Like if it does go to tribunal, they'll say, well, look, Arsenal offered this guy $100,000 a week. They wanted to keep him, so But so in the assumption he gets offered this contract, though, so that's him. So let's just say he stays at Arsenal Football Club and Lacazette's gone. So that's one striker that remains. Yeah. Balogun. Do you think Balogun is ready to come into Arsenal and play games next season?
This is a really interesting thing, because just to go back to Eddie, I think the real question isn't not should he stay or should he go? Or should we give him a new contract? It's what is his role going to be in the team next season?
Yeah, good question.
And depending on how you feel about that, you then can kind of answer, well, how do you feel about Balogun? Because when we signed Balogun on a new contract, the assumption was we chose Balogun over Eddie.
Yeah, that was the assumption.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we thought Eddie's not going to sign a new contract, or we're not going to potentially give him a new contract, or whatever the case was.
It was inconceivable at that time, wasn't it, that Ober and Laka would be out within 12 months.
That too, yeah. And at that point, the dynamics of how we kind of gave Balogun the contract was probably a bit different. I wouldn't be surprised if he thought, well, actually, Eddie is going this year, Lacazette is potentially going, because that was probably quite clear. And Balogun was probably thinking, well, maybe I could be the Europa League striker after I come back from loan. Or I can get, because at that point he was getting, he got a couple of goals in the Europa League. I don't know if that was the season before, but to go back to Eddie, if you think Eddie is signing a new contract and we're giving him a new contract on the basis that he is a second striker, because I think we probably both agree that he's not going to be our number one striker next season, right? Like if he is, then something probably has gone very wrong.
Something's gone very wrong, yeah.
If you say he's the number two striker, where he's going to play all the Europa League games, he's going to start all the cup games, then the question is, well, who's the number three striker? And then you say, well, is that going to be Balogun? Because it's very unlikely that if we're going to sign a number three striker, that it's going to be that we're going to spend money on someone who's a third choice striker. So, and then that also raises a question, well, if Eddie is your number two striker, what kind of striker do you get as your number one, and who is that striker?
That's a big question. Just something to add. I think that when you're in 4 competitions, there's actually every chance that your first and second striker play a very similar amount of minutes over 4 competitions.
I agree. Yeah.
So I think that I think for Eddie that will be playing a part in his mind. Where I think Arteta, I think even if Arteta wasn't explicitly saying this, I think it's so obvious that we are going to try and sign a striker to be our number one striker. And I think that would have been really transparent to him. But they would have said, "Listen, mate, like we need a second striker, and a second striker will play lots of games, may still play lots of Premier League games, or get lots of Premier League minutes. You don't know how the season's going to pan out, and you don't know injuries, you don't know whatever. But the fact is, when you're in 4 competitions, your second striker will play a lot of games." So by that also, I think that Balogun, if he is your third choice striker, Balogun still will get minutes. I still think Balogun is the third choice, whoever the third choice striker is will get minutes. Even if you go out early in the League Cup or FA Cup, I still think that they'll get minutes. I actually have okay, maybe we'll just stick on Eddie for a second. I think for me a bit of a not concern is that who would be is there a potential that we may actually sign 2 strikers still because of numbers, sheer numbers. Still, the numbers still don't add up, because we were okay this season. This season we went in at the beginning with Oba, Laka, and Eddie playing 3 competitions, right? So now even if you take Balogun in and you're losing Oba and Laka, and now you've got one more competition, then in theory still you need 2 strikers in theory.
Yeah, I agree. I want us to sign. I want Eddie to be our third choice striker next season, who plays the League Cup games. He plays the Europa League games. Miles has said this for a while, that Eddie's a perfect Europa League group stage striker, right? There are going to be a lot of minutes for a lot of players next season, and we need to get better at rotating. I think Saka played pretty much every minute of every league game, or almost every league game, right?
I think he played a part in every game.
Yeah. That is not sustainable, right? And not only that, we've got a November World Cup to come into the mix of next season as well, where who knows what players are going to come back feeling and what the situation with fitness.
It's a good point. That's right? Very under.
So, I can see a situation where we could probably there's going to be. I was looking at the schedule, and I think by November 20th or something, we'd have played 16 league games, and the Europa League group stages will be done as well. There's going to be a lot of games in that first chunk of the season, and all it takes is one injury up front, and then all of a sudden we're stretched thin again. And I think I really want us to get out of this situation where, I think all of this season that's just gone, we knew that one injury to any of our first 11, and we would drop a level considerably. Yeah. And I want us to be out of that situation. I want us to say, well, actually, okay, well, whoever we sign first, right? Our first choice striker, if he's injured, we can have a second choice, and we're cool with that. We can rotate, and we're not dropping our level just by the fact that one player is out. And I think if we are starting Eddie in league games, we're going to be dropping a level. We're going to be last season's level, and I want us to be a level above that. Now, so I think if we have a new striker, whoever that is, plus Eddie, plus Balogun, I don't think that's enough. I don't think that's good enough. I don't think that's enough numbers. What I think we need is 2 strikers. Now, you can argue whether that striker could be a player that can play across the front 3, for example. But we need 2 bodies. We need a Lacazette replacement. We need an Aubameyang replacement, and we go with Eddie plus Balogun. I think that's what we should be aiming for.
I agree. I'm not as put off by the idea of Eddie playing Premier League games, I think. But I am in complete agreement, which I think it's just we need to get out of this fragility of one player being out and everything's screwed. And if we sign one striker and something happens to that striker, we'll just be making excuses for the season.
Or even if Eddie gets injured next season, if Eddie misses games, are we going to play that one striker in the Europa League, or are we going to be running with Balogun in the Europa League?
Exactly. Totally.
I can see a situation where we sign 2 attacking players. I think what we'll probably do is we'll sign a Lacazette. If we talk about the squad, we'll sign a Lacazette replacement. We'll probably sign a Pepe replacement if Pepe goes. And that wide player will hopefully be able to, maybe rotate and play up front if needed, or we can just modify the system where we can rely on them more for goals. We
need that as well? Don't we need that? Because if we're saying that it's not just... we have people like Saka who was overplayed. We had other players who played a lot of minutes. Odegaard played shed loads of minutes. We're obviously going to need to go in the market and get some backups for those players. Now, kind of what you were saying before, I think what's really frustrating is the one position where we had backup was right wing, Pepe for Saka, and Pepe had just done such a clearly poor job in training, poor job impact, just showing anything, that Arteta couldn't trust him. I think Arteta probably wanted to trust him. He trusted him surely at the end of last season. I mean, let's not go down that rabbit hole for a second. But the point is, if Pepe goes, we're surely going to have to sign another player to be that right wing kind of backup. And maybe some versatility will help that they can play up front. But I still think we need another, 2 forwards on top of that.
I think in an ideal world, I think the reality is they will probably have to make do with that second new striker being someone like a Martinelli type who, at a push, can play up front.
This Marquinhos guy who apparently we're the new Martinelli.
If Wolves don't come and tribunal us,
sue us. We get a transfer ban. Can you imagine?
That would be hilarious. No, let's not joke about that. No, I think you're right. In an ideal world, we would have two strikers. We'd have four strikers with, one of them being Balogun, one of them being Eddie, and then two more. But I don't think the reality is I don't think we will get that second striker, because then you're right. There are a lot of games, but you can see players becoming unhappy, and Arteta just hasn't really figured out yet how to rotate a squad, and I think that's going to be almost like going to the other extreme. I think we'll gradually get there, and I think we'll probably have to make do. And the other question is, if we do have four strikers, is Balogun going to be happy, being on the bench and getting, coming off for Europa League games, continuing the role that he had a couple of years ago where he got scraps? I think Balogun probably will come back and think, well, I've just signed this new contract. I'm expecting to work my way into the squad. Well,
let's look at it another angle. Is it even best for Balogun for him to be that because he's gone on loan, and he hasn't smashed it up. He's not coming back with like a logo. So does he need to go on loan again where he's playing regularly? Should someone else be our fourth choice striker? Another there's Marcelo Flores, who apparently people are raving about as well. Should he be fourth choice? Should Balogun go somewhere to get minutes?
Yeah, I think that's probably actually quite sensible. I think, that fourth choice striker, if we do have Eddie plus two more, that fourth choice striker is going to be the player that kind of comes in and out from the academy, like sits on the bench for Europa League games, maybe gets 30 minutes, or like some of those, if we've already qualified, might get a start, or helping us chase a game. We can bring him on to just get, keep in mind we'll also have 5 subs in the Premier League next season, so hopefully players can get a few more minutes as well.
Good point.
So, I think actually, if we're talking that fourth choice, then whether it's Balogun, whether it's Flores, I don't know too many of the other academy strikers.
There's Mika Biereth.
They're probably all quite interchangeable at that level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's look at that. Assume it's one centre forward. Yeah, assume it's one centre forward that we go out and buy. Just for a second, we can talk about if we sign a second one in a second. What's the key profile for you? Because we've been linked with Gabriel Jesus, probably the most. He's probably the most concrete link, because it sounds like there are people in his camp that are sort of coming out there and saying, we're talking to Arsenal, and there's like lots of media who are saying Arsenal front runners. There's some, in my opinion, crazy figures being thrown out, given he's got 1 year left on his deal, and they're sort of quoting 50, 60 million euros or something crazy like that. I mean, that's got to be batshit crazy. There's no chance anyone should be doing that for 1 year on their contract. But figures aside, if he's the guy, is he the sort of profile of striker that you think we should be bringing in, or is it a different profile that you would be into?
Well, I think the question is who else, right? So if we are assuming is this striker and Eddie and Balogun, who we go with, then I think it's a massive risk going all in on Gabriel Jesus as the striker. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately what we want is someone who can get, like, we want an Aubameyang level striker, of someone who can come in and be like, that is our striker who is going to get us 20 goals a season. Right? And I know these strikers are very hard to find, right? If they were everywhere, we would have probably done this a long time ago. But, I think Gabriel Jesus has a lot of good qualities. I think the fact that he's super versatile, he can play anywhere, tactically he's there, he works hard, he presses. I think he has a lot of qualities that Arteta likes.
Yes.
The big worry there is, will he be able to reliably and consistently deliver goals? And if you look at his statistics, he hasn't ever really hit that level yet. And he could. And he could come good. And if we play him in 38 games, there's every chance that he could get 20 goals. But it's a massive risk, especially when your plan B is Eddie, who's also a risk, and your plan C is Balogun, who's a risk. We're just taking gamble upon gamble upon gamble. And I just felt like the Vlahovic type profile, and there's arguments against him, like he's gone to Juve and he hasn't really done well yet. No. Mm-hmm. There's every argument that he might never get 20 goals a season, but I just felt that type of bully in the box has just a much bigger chance of exploding and dominating, and I don't see Jesus doing that. Well, I hope I'm wrong, because we get him, I think the question is then, like, is a profile and is a front two, and I'll ask you this: if we sign Jesus, we had Jesus, Eddie, and Balogun as our three strikers.
Yeah.
And we did other things in the midfield and wherever, right?
Yeah.
Would you be like, okay, that's our striker situation resolved?
No, I think the main concern for me would be profile, actually, because on simple terms, I think that Jesus improves Arsenal. I think he's a very good player. Yeah. He's a Champions League footballer. Like, he's a valuable squad player for Man City. I agree with a lot of what you've said, right? Like, I think there was early on in his career at Man City that he was getting quite a lot of goals, and now, even though his numbers look okay this season, bearing in mind he scored 4 in one game, so it's not been that consistent. My main issue, actually, if we were just going to sign him, so that scenario that you described, is, for me, he's basically a better version of Eddie. He's a very similar profile in some ways, right? Like, he's not a physical presence. He's got really good movement. And he's very good at pressing. And as Pep, I think Pep Guardiola said he thinks he's the best pressing forward in the world, and the Brazil manager said the same thing. So he's clearly an elite presser that Arteta clearly likes him. He's got lots of Premier League experience. He's 25 years old. There's no reason to suggest that if you start, kind of like you alluded to, if you start Gabriel Jesus every game, there is a decent chance he gets you good numbers. My concern is he doesn't give us any different dimension necessarily than that we haven't had. And I think the thing that we have definitely lacked is this dominating centre forward, a kind of someone who can bully defenders. Jesus won't bully defenders. He's gonna really piss off defenders. He'll get in really good positions. He'll confuse them, exactly. Yeah. As I said, I think he's a better. I do just think he's a better version of Eddie. But I think we've struggled sometimes this season where we've just not had a kind of plan B centre forward type, someone who you can just plug some balls in, some high balls into the far post, get someone to just kind of beat some people up a bit and just be a real problem.
And I think, actually, when I go back to, I said, okay, well, if we have 4 strikers and that second striker is a striker who can kind of play across the wing and play up front, Jesus fits that role quite well.
I agree with that. Actually, sorry.
God, no, I think you can play Jesus up front if you need to, but actually you can also play him as a wide player in a slightly different system than what we play now, but you can accommodate someone like him, and I think he will fit most systems and he will make it work. And then if we then had another type of striker, plan A, that was a bit different, that would be ideal. So if we went to next season with big striker, Jesus, Eddie and Balogun, I would be delighted.
But I would be delighted too, but I just can't see it happening, because then he's basically just being for us what he is at Man City.
But I agree. Yeah, I agree. But I'm also like, actually, at the top level, how many players consistently start every game? Like, you look at what Liverpool do now. They've got, I know they've probably done some forward planning, but they've got Mane, they've got Salah, they've got Jota, they've got Diaz. All of those would start 30, 40 games at a mid-level Premier League club, but they're at that top level. And I know we're not at that level yet, but they're there because they start every game. You look at Man City, and again, I'm not comparing us, but they rotate. They play players for certain games. They play players without in other games. They give them rest in random Premier League games. Chelsea do that to a certain extent sometimes with Havertz, and sometimes Lukaku comes in against weaker Premier League teams because he can get a job, get a goal and do a job there. There are going to be times when a lot of the reasons we did badly this season were because we didn't rotate well, because we didn't really have the ability to. Arteta didn't trust his substitutes. But the reason he didn't trust the substitutes because they didn't have minutes to deliver. So it was like a kind of like a catch-22. So I think if he has a squad, especially like I said, with 5 substitutes that he can give minutes to, a good manager finds a way to keep these players happy. And like I said, there's a number 2 striker plays 20 games.
But I think that if you're bringing someone in externally and you're convincing them to say, okay, look, we're playing 4 competitions, you're going to get loads of minutes, you might not start all the games, etc., etc. I think that when your European competition is Champions League, it's kind of easier to convince people.
That's true. Yeah, you're right.
So it's just with Jesus. I think that it's just the problem with him is that's what he has now, and if I can only imagine that the only way that we're going to convince him to come to us is if Arteta is saying, you know, I want you to predominantly play centre forward and be my kind of main striker. Yeah, we'll rotate like other teams have to rotate, but ultimately I want you to do that. And therefore, I can't see us signing him and another like an out and out kind of target man type centre forward. I can't see that happening just because it would mean that Jesus may not be our kind of number 1, number 9, if that makes sense.
I think
but I want it. But I agree with you in that. That's what I would want.
Ambitious club.
Yeah,
a real, like, if we were really going for it, to say we're not just, you know, we want to be part of the top 4 for the next 5 years consistently. They probably go out and do that. But the problem is that also we're probably going to have to make Eddie promises as well. So. Yeah. Not only do you have to keep 2 new strikers happy, you've got to keep the third one that you've just given a new contract to, and Balogun, who you've given a contract to last year. And this is a manager who, as seen, isn't the best at rotating and finding that balance between bringing players in and out of the squad. So, like, my gut feel is that I think we will probably end up with I think we'll end up with a compromised striker in whoever we sign. There will be something about them that fans will find a reason to moan about. So be that experience, be that age, be that goals, be that technical ability, they will fall short. I mean, like, ultimately, that's probably normal. Like, any player, they're not perfect. But we're not going to get this one-size-fits-all striker that solves all of our problems all of the time.
No.
And I think that's probably why me and you are saying, actually, let's get 2, because we like what Jesus can give us, because he's a good player. But then let's also address the gaps that he brings in not maybe getting goals consistently by getting that bully of a striker in. But yeah, you're right. I don't think we'll do it. I think we'll get 1 plus Eddie.
But what if because a plausible thing is that you do sign Gabriel Jesus as your kind of number 1 striker, if you like, and he's the guy, he's plan A. And you sign a plan B striker who is a target man who doesn't actually cost as much, like it isn't. So I'm thinking about as opposed to a Tammy Abraham or a Victor Semien who would seem to cost in excess of 50, 60 million, those kind of numbers. Can you see us going in for someone like an Ivan Toney for, you know, let's just say, I don't know how much, but let's just call it 30 million, maybe?
I don't think it'll be someone like Ivan Toney, but I can see us maybe signing the next Ivan Toney.
Okay.
Like, if we can find a player who's in his, 23, 24, at a smaller club, who's willing to come and say, actually, I'm fine. I don't expect to be the number 1 striker in your North London derbies and your big games, but actually, I want to come off the bench in games, and I want to start cup games, and I want to start when you want to rest your first choice striker, or you want to try something different. I think there must be strikers out there who can do that. And we are a big enough club to be attracting those strikers. Strikers in Serie A, strikers in La Liga who can come in. If
we can get a Giroud,
the Lucas Perez types, the Girouds, yeah. Like, these strikers who come in and can do a job, and will be happy if they're not the man. That would be ideal. That would be you were obviously gambling on them coming good, but I can accept that if we've got a proven winner in Gabriel Jesus or that type up front already.
Yeah, that's fair. So Gabriel Jesus is, fine. He's the one that we're massively linked with or whatever. But let's just say if you could have 1 centre forward, right? If there's one person out there that you think is that, let's just say if we're willing to spend the kind of money that we were on Vlahovic, so let's just call that, I don't know, let's just say we're willing to spend 70 million quid on a centre forward.
Yeah.
Which centre forward would you have?
So I was really excited about Vlahovic. Like, I think he was like I'm not a scout or anything, but the bits I saw of him on YouTube when it looked like he was coming, he really excited me. So honestly, I'd say just go and give Juventus 70 million and buy Vlahovic. But Surely
not. Surely they're going to give him some time.
No, I know they will, unfortunately. I don't know. There's I really like Toney. He didn't have the best season this season, but Calvert-Lewin's also someone that excited me. I know and also like the Tammy Abraham type. I was never convinced with him. I think we have a famous debate with him. It's a shame Mize isn't here, but I was never convinced by him. But he's shown that, again, you give a player time and games that they can come good. Whether they can step up from Serie A is a question, but he has got Premier League experience. So I'm open to who we sign. I just want them to score goals.
Yeah, I know. Like you sort of open up with, right, when we started talking about this, strikers is exciting, and we've not had a window in a while where it's been the striker window that's not been that. So this is kind of fun because in the Wenger years, every summer was a striker window, right? It was just we'd sign forwards all the time. So look, that is enjoyable. So it's one of these things that we could probably talk about this for ages, because there's not, what we do know is that we need numbers. We know that we need one. One will definitely come. Right, we know that even if we sign only one, we're going to need an alternative in some way, whether it's a wide player who can come in and do it. But really, those options are just going to be endless. Who knows what's going on in Arteta's head? So time will tell. And hey, man, like, what if Eddie declines his contract and then?
Yeah, I was just about to say, like, there's no guarantee he signs, and then we need two, maybe three. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's inconceivable that we would go sign 3 centre forwards in a window. But it could be, if Eddie doesn't stay, then we sign sort of, maybe just spend a little bit more money on 2, and then you've got Balogun and someone else, and maybe we try and hope Martinelli can play in centre. I don't know, but it's a lot of hypotheticals. But I think there's things that we agree on. I think we both agree on that Eddie staying if Eddie does stay, that's a good thing. Laka going is a good thing. And sort of depending on how everything else goes, then maybe Balogun going back on loan is also a good thing. This is the area that needs to be addressed in the squad, right? If there's one thing we address, and there are other things, by the way, that we definitely should address. I think we agree on, and we will talk about that another day. But this is it, And I guess I'll just finish up on is how would you rather we went and got someone in the next few weeks? Let's just say it's a Gabriel Jesus. We get Gabriel Jesus in a few weeks. Or do you think, if there's any chance that we think that we might be able to get someone who we think is even better, but we're going to need to long it out and get them in the last week or on deadline day, what would you rather do?
I think this season, we need to get our business done early.
Yeah, I agree.
Because actually, I was thinking about it when I made that comment earlier about the season. I don't know how it looks with the deadline. I assume the deadline's on the 1st of September. But with the season starting even earlier, and the amount of games that they're going to try and cram in, if we wait till the last day, that could be game 6 or 7 of the Premier League. And that means we're going to be running with Eddie and Nketiah up front for 5 Premier League games. That doesn't seem right. And then we're going to give them time to settle in. So that's probably, if you get to September this year, there's not many international breaks in the start of the next season. It could be game 8 or 9 in the league by the time the strike is up and running, and we can't afford to throw away that many points by not being ready. So this season of all seasons, we absolutely have to be ready by game 1 to have 95% of our squad ready. Yeah. And I'm worried because I don't know if we have the capability to do that.
Yeah, we've not historically done it that well, have we? I mean, listen, if we end up making some deadline day sort of transfers like we did this season, getting Tomiyasu on the final day, I won't really mind if stuff like, if we pull out those kind of rabbit down hats. But ultimately, look, man, I'm in total agreement that I think that this can't be a season where we have to write off the first few games of the season. Yeah, and then kind of go, but it's okay because actually, we signed better players and we were better afterwards. No, like, this can't be that type of season. This needs to be a season where we're not regretting the first few games.
Yeah, with the first 11, like, we should know a week before, in an ideal world, 3-4 days before the season starts, this is our best 11, right? Yeah. If we're still doing business for the backup central midfielder or a second choice right winger or a second choice right back or left back or whatever. That's okay. That's cool. We can deal with that.
Yeah.
One change here and there where we find a similar player and they work their way into the team, that's fine. But we have known for a long time that we have had a gap here. And we have had pretty much all season to plan for this 1 or 2 these one or two strikers, right? Like, we just need to get on with it and get it done.
Get it done, exactly. Just like this podcast tonight. We are done.
Yeah.
Cool. Listen, Aaron, thank you very much. Let's cross our fingers, rather, that this works, this new Riverside recording. So well done, everyone. If you do hear this, your positivity and support has just kind of made us persevere to try out new software and try and take us to the next level, right? This is all you guys. So, look, guys, everyone, thank you for joining us. We know that it's off-season, and so you might want breaks from Arsenal, but we did entertain the same thing, and we may not record as often in the summer, but we certainly will drop some at least. So maybe the next episode we jump into midfielders, defenders, goalkeepers, and I'm sure there'll be more to talk about just by virtue of them. Well, midfielders, defenders, anyway, having more players to talk about. I was thinking about this before the pod, Aaron, and I was thinking, geez, like, actually, God, we're going to have to review some players who, you know, is Lucas Torreira, is Ainsley Maitland-Niles, are they players that we need to talk about? Because, you know, they haven't sealed deals at other clubs yet, so there's still lots to talk about. But anyway, for another day. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Please like, share, subscribe, all those really fun things. We really appreciate it. It really helps us gauge, you know, how people are receiving the pod. So please do if you can. Aaron, thanks for joining us. Enjoy, everyone. Also, if you're in the UK, enjoy your long weekend, your long 4-day weekend. We certainly are. Cool. All right. Good night, everyone. Good night,
Cheers,
Aaron.
bye.
Bye-bye.